Namaskar. Honorable Ministers, senior officials, colleagues, panelists, participants, and viewers, welcome to the concluding session of today's webinar. Honorable, as India moves towards its centenary celebrations in 2047, the budget 2022 included several new initiatives with a focus on growth and inclusive development during the next 25 years. Today's budget webinar focuses on technology-enabled development. Plenary one started with the inaugural address by Honorable Prime Minister, where he shared his vision for a technology-enabled India in the Amrit Kal and set the goals and expectations for the groups to deliberate in the breakout sessions. While emphasizing on the sunrise sectors such as AI, geospatial, drones, semiconductors, space technology, etc., he once again stressed the need for a strong 5G ecosystem, data governance, and use of technology for empowering our citizens. The principal scientific advisor emphasized that collaborations between research, academia, and industry is necessary to improve our S&T capabilities and how S&T investments will build India's capabilities of the future in diverse areas such as climate change mitigation, energy transition, telecommunication, etc. Today's event brought together leading personalities from the industry, policymakers, and government officials to dwell on the technology-related budget announcements and identify actionable strategies to ensure ease of living of common man. As we celebrate the glorious years of India's progress, especially in the field of science and technology, we acknowledge the significant and unparalleled contribution made by several eminent scientists. These luminaries shaped the scientific interventions in India and thus began the journey to ensure India's strategic autonomy in various fields of science and technology. With the Government of India's policies on Atmanirbhar Bharat, there is major focus on a self-reliant ecosystem in science, technology, and innovation, along with transfer of science to solutions. With the learnings and success stories of the past in various R&D sectors, we need to develop capabilities to find innovative S&T solutions for the benefit of common man through seamless conversion of knowledge to application. This is possible with the appropriate linkages between academia, industrial, and civil society to ultimately scale our ambitious but doable plans by 2047. In recent years, we saw the benefit of a robust biotech research ecosystem and the pharma manufacturing ecosystem, wherein our country was able to develop, demonstrate, and deliver multiple domestic vaccines for COVID. We also developed our own 5G technology with integrated efforts. We now look forward to the outcomes of the 4 breakaway sessions, which deliberated upon the positive impact of the budget to facilitate a technology-enabled environment for delivery of R&D solutions to the citizens of the country. Breakaway Session 1 on building a strong 5G ecosystem for service delivery, led by Department of Telecommunication, had a focused panel discussion on promoting Make in India of 5G products and make it affordable so that the broadband and mobile services reach the remotest corner of the country. Breakaway Session 2 on Science and Technology towards a Circular Economy, led by Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, dwelled on challenges in managing e-waste and development of recycling technology and policy for recycling. Panel discussions on energy efficiency, low carbon technology development, and next generation mobility also form part of the session. Department of Science and Technology led the 3rd breakaway session on promoting R&D, human resources in emerging areas, and once again emphasized on the importance of bridging the industry-academia gap for R&D innovations. And there was a special session on need for a national geospatial policy. Breakaway Session 4 on emerging technologies for sustainable development, led by Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, led sessions on motivating startups and how India can be made a global hub for data center and cloud. Now I invite the secretaries of lead ministries of the 4 breakout sessions to summarize the outcomes of today's events. The order of the presentation will be Shri K. Rajaraman, Secretary, Department of Telecommunication on breakout session 1, Dr. Shekhar Wande, Secretary, Department of Scientific and Industrial Research on breakout session 2, Dr. S. Chandrasekhar, Secretary, Department of Science and Technology on breakout section 3. The last presentation will be made by Secretary, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Subsequently, we will seek the views and guidance from the Honorable Ministers of the line ministries on the deliberations on the breakout session. Over to Secretary Rajaraman.
Discussions. The first one is regarding the PLI schemes of DOT and METI. And the second topic was on the use of technology, design, etc., for the delivery of services in the rural areas. So the suggestions made by the various panelists have been summarized in 4 slides. First of all, I think the first set of suggestions have come on developing India as a manufacturing. The point that was made by some of the representatives of the industry was that the India has done very well in terms of the mobile equipment manufacturing development within the country, while there are certain subsectors such as IT hardware, wearables, etc., where I think and telecom equipment, where I think a lot more work needs to be done. So therefore, essentially, there were some of the points that were made are listed here. The first one is leveraging the large home market to spur production within the country, which I think precisely the design is for. But they would feel that they felt that there needs to be more economies of scale by bigger production facilities. The second point made by them was that there must be a greater support under the PMI scheme. I mean, where I think there must be some incentivization for TSPs for procuring local equipment, telecom equipment. There must be exclusive access at least to about 20% of the market to enable Indian champions to emerge, and use of domestic products only in certain critical sectors. So these are some of the suggestions they have given in terms of the PMI. The other points that were made was that there must be a design-led manufacturing initiative in all the sectors. I mean, I think so. They were happy to note that the telecom department has come out with a program, but they felt that similar such facilities must be available in other production linked incentive schemes as well. Then they've also mentioned that there must be no cap on R&D investments under this program, including manpower, because there are some caps relating to manpower expenditure, etc., under the scheme. They also felt that the Indian IP-led manufacturing of key mobile phone components such as displays, cameras, etc., must be given preference, so that I think we have greater value addition within this country. The next set of suggestions related to growth of R&D within the country, and India attempting to become a global R&D hub as part of the global value chain. So the suggestions included acceleration of R&D investments for 5G products with Indian design and intellectual property, and also provision of R&D grants on at least on a 1:1 matching basis with private industry for investments made to develop Indian 5G products over the next 2 to 3 years. They also felt that technology test beds, I think they were referring to the 5G test bed which was set up. So they felt right from the beginning, we set up as an industry institution consortium, so that right from the beginning, the collaboration takes place, not after the test bed is ready. So then they also suggested that we must try to create champions for Indian intellectual property rights in the fields of 5G and mobile phones, 5G and electronics. So in the semiconductor sector, there was a suggestion that R&D must be promoted in fabulous design for chipsets less than 28 nanometers. And the R&D funding models should be risk funding programs, which is prevalent in some countries like Israel. Next, please. The other set of suggestions also included setting up more 5G test beds for use case development in the country, because essentially, since the use cases are just evolving, they felt that probably sector-specific test beds need to be developed to promote a greater emergence of use case technologies. Similarly, IIT Madras Professor Ramamurthy also mentioned that the need to use the locally developed components for design in India. I think he was referring to the Shakti processor, which could be embedded into domestic narrowband IoT, as well as in the radio access network distribution units, etc., which are being developed under the 5G program. So this greater collaboration between various parts of the Indian ecosystem is being referred to by him. Then there is also need to align all private and public institutional efforts across the ecosystem, because it is felt that sometimes a lot of these institutions, R&D institutions, including within the government and outside, actually overlap and try to reinvent the wheel all by themselves. So it was felt that all of the institutions must join together in a collaborative effort where we divide the pieces of work and then collaborate for producing a whole. So this kind of an effort, I think, is required going forward. This was an excellent suggestion that was received. Then an interdisciplinary lab ecosystem and certification for validation is something which is very important for actually IP development within the country. Next, please. there was also a suggestion on the connectivity components. One of them was on designing a new OFC cable embedded with power cables, because essentially they were referring to the enabling which has reached out to every village with power energy availability through electrical cables. So they were there was a feeling that this strength could be further harnessed by designing a new OFC cable which can be integrated with the power cables to reach out to every village. Similarly, collaborations with DISCOMs, which already have the right of way to all the villages, must be harnessed to actually reach out to every village to achieve what the Honorable Prime Minister had said in reaching out to all the 6 lakh villages soon. Integration of communication solutions for electric vehicles is also something which there was a suggestion. Strong backhaul and connectivity and broadband connectivity using the new highways which are being built is something which needs to be given attention. Then need for spectrum use for meeting the rural needs and urban needs was mentioned, specifically with reference to E-band and V-band. So Professor Abhay Karndikar mentioned that at least 5 carriers of E-band should be delicensed to enable such use cases in rural areas, and also to proliferate the broadband speeds in rural areas. There was also the suggestion that V-band has to be delicensed to enable low power use within in captive networks. There was also a few suggestions related to captive networks, that there is a need for policies for captive networks enabling Industry 4 to flower within this country. These are some of the major suggestions which have been received during this. We will be giving a more detailed note with other suggestions also which have been received. I am stopping here because of limitation of time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rajaraman. We now go on to Dr. Shekhar Mande, Secretary, Department of Science and Scientific and Industrial Research, DG CSIR. Dr. Mande.
Thank you, Professor Vijayaraghavan. So, as was mentioned by Honorable Prime Minister in his speech today morning, he said that circular economy approach will not only reduce the waste, but also enable competitive industry to grow and enhance public health. So there was a key message actually in the morning, and we were assigned on these lines 4 different themes that we discussed on. One was on e-waste. The second one was on green energy and low carbon technology. The third was on energy efficiency. And the fourth one on e-mobility and battery swapping and so on and so forth. So the discussions actually took place in this, and multiple people from both academia and industry and the government, they participated in the discussions. So in the section on e-waste, essentially people highlighted what is the current status, which I have listed on the left-hand panel there. I am not going to read out all of that, but it suggests that there is a huge scope based on the existing network to further grow in this particular area. And the substantial ground has been covered already by multiple institutions such as CMET, CPET, IITs and CSIR. But the policy interventions that might be required are also actually listed on the right-hand side. That is, so we need to actually some policy framework for recycling and end use within India. We need to create an ecosystem for chip manufacturing, which already government has actually started work on this. Private sector roles are to be integrated for employment generation and role of stakeholders in capacity building. And this point came again and again in all the themes that skill development actually is absolutely necessary in all of these, actually all the 4 areas that we are talking of. Skill development, because the scale that at which we want to operate, we need many more people, and private industries can actually come and help us in that particular aspect. And then there was creating awareness for e-waste for recycling among both users and vendors. Next slide, please. The next session was on green energy and low carbon technologies. Once again, status is lifted on the left-hand side that currently we have very high dependence on the fossil-based fuels, and by 2030 our goals are actually to 500 gigawatt of power, which would not be fossil-based, and about 25% energy demands are for cooking, which is a neglected area for transitional R&D. So this is the kind of thing actually things that came up, that we have a biofuel policy already in place. But the policy framework that would be needed would be to develop network of industrial ecological systems, which would be essentially industry academia partnerships. The bioeconomy needs a consistent policy support where we need to actually assure via mandates and supply side security of feedstock at stable prices. And some of it also could be agri residues and so on and so forth. Renewable power is to be dispatchable and invest in energy storage at scale, which of course the government has announced number of PLI schemes on these particular areas. Then decarbonize large energy consumers such as steel, fertilizers, thermal power, and so on and so forth. And PLI at component level for renewable power infrastructure, some of it is already in place. The Honorable Prime Minister also mentioned in the morning that 14 key sectors already have been for manufacture. The PLI schemes are in place, but probably we may need a few more in circular economy area. In the next slide, we talk about energy efficiency and saving measures. Now, this also was a very fascinating session where status is that higher energy use for our aspirations actually would lead to depleted resources. But the important point there was made was if we actually make a shift towards electricity, that actually might actually save our dependence on some of the other energy intensive resources by use of electricity. And electricity, of course, we can generate from non-renewable, from renewable sources as well. The policy things that would be needed, where actually private sector's roles actually needs to be integrated for employment generation in this particular aspect. Some of the very important points that were made in the policy side were things like how do we integrate the informal sector with the formal sector? For example, in e-waste recycling, we know that the integration of formal sector, informal sector needs further enhancement. And one of the suggestions that came, I just put it on for consideration here, was can we actually not also have the informal sector consider on par with small farmers and all the policies for farmers and all those things which are there. The other one was the role of stakeholders in capacity building and awareness of energy needs to be enhanced. Then audits and performance contracts and all, they also need to be improved at a very large scale. And the development of common measures and verification, they need to be highlighted. The fourth session was on next generation mobility. Okay, on this slide, please. Yeah. This was actually on mobility, e-vehicle policies and battery swapping, etc. Here actually there are a number of PLI schemes already in place in this particular domain. And the status is that charging swapping stations and service on fleet are emerging concepts and they need to be promoted in this particular aspect. We know that our dependence on this thing is going to be increasing in the coming time, and therefore we have to be ready for both manufacture of lithium-ion batteries and the next generation batteries, which could have different chemistries, other chemistries than this. But also the infrastructure for battery swapping and all also needs to be generated at multiple places. The policy that would be needed would be to nurture Indian industries and promote the startups for indigenous manufacturing of batteries and related components for EVs through the PLI schemes, which of course is already in place now, the PLI scheme. The minimum level of battery manufacturing needs to be at least 1 gigawatt hour to meet the 55 gigawatt hour target capacity, which is aimed by the government of India today. Then we need to actually generate industry, academia, research lab consortia, and this should be encouraged on sustainable battery chemistry and form the further policies in this particular regard. And the last point was the Indian standards need to be finalized, and this actually requires a good amount of work of our standard, which are in tune with the global best practices in what actually would be policies and all in this particular matter. And the raw material supply chain has to be strengthened to so that we are not affected eventually by disruptions in the supply chain, logistics, and so on and so forth. So to summarize, what we actually need is to establish national capacity across public and private sectors, across academia and across industry with translational research expertise, with economically viable and globally competitive technologies, which is important. And I actually mentioned the last one in the previous slide, that we have to actually tune ourselves with the globally competitive thing, because there are too many overseas players also would be jumping the gun at some point of time. So we will actually need to have our own standards which are defined according to the global standards. The timelines are quite tight, and the global players, as I said, are waiting in the wings to come in at a very short notice. So what we need to actually is a well-coordinated set of parallel efforts with clear implementation plans and effective monitoring, where accountability would be an essential ingredient. So this is essentially what we discussed in the circular economy section, but several useful suggestions, more detailed notes are available with us. So we'll be very happy to generate a more detailed note based on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now request Secretary Science and Technology, Dr. S. Chandrasekhar for his introduction.
Honorable ministers and dignitaries on the call today, greetings to all of you. Today, DST has coordinated two breakaway sessions. Breakaway number 3, which was on promoting the R&D human resource in emerging areas. So revitalizing the industry academia collaboration, catering to entire innovation and technology life cycle. And the second was the transforming India through geospatial knowledge and infrastructure need for a national geospatial policy. So if we look at the first session, which was attended by the panelists, leaders from pharma, automobile industry, startups, and other sectors. And we had Dr. Satish Reddy from Reddy's, Chintan Vaishnav, Mission Director, Atal Innovation, Indranil Manna, former Director of IIT and also currently President of INAE, Shankar Venugopal from Mahindra & Mahindra, Taslim Arif Saeed, and Sandeep Verma from SCRB, and Anita Gupta from DST. So the deliberations went on for 2 hours, and the major takeaway for this, while the slides are getting uploaded, actually the major takeaways from this message has been that we need to make sure that the translational research gets the top priority, as the investments into the fundamental science have gone for the last several years, and we built a nice base. And now they wanted, all the recommendations were that how we would now put our investments into translational work. Also, one major recommendation came in the industry academia collaboration, which is not on a large scale in our country currently, is the postdoctoral culture. Many of the developed nations always have postdoctoral culture, where they're the ones who do a lot of translational work, and also the designation of those postdoctoral fellows to be getting assistant professors and on a tenure basis, and also routine technical and scientific audits and continuous monitoring of all the investments made by the government into research activities. So this is one strong recommendation came up. Another one was on how we could really promote the research innovation, solving societal problems. As Honorable Prime Minister today was addressing, the science is universal, but the science has to be used for technology for the local use. So science for local use is something all the panelists have taken into consideration. Also, while we are talking on the policy framework and patents, there has been a strong desire that the patent box has to be strengthened in such a way that the financial gains are shared between academia and industry. Also, the one recommendation was many academic institutes don't have a professional tech transfer departments, and it was felt that a professional tech transfer department with proper freedom to transfer the technology to industry without too much of bureaucratic hurdles was one important recommendation came in this sector. When we are talking of the new education policy, it was also felt that if you can really embrace some of the best Western universities and top universities in the world, we're partnering with our state universities so that the ecosystem could be strengthened. Also, another important recommendation came from the industry friends was like research-linked incentives. Many a times, the industry spends a lot of money on the R&D, but they have been requesting the government that whether they could get some tax incentives when they invest monies into R&D activities. Another major recommendation came was the coexistence of the academic and industrial partners into same campus, whether an academic institute could go and coexist on industrial campus or vice versa. That way, I think the collaborative programs could go much better. And one major recommendation from our Mahindra colleague was whether industry academia can sit together and make a 10-year roadmap that both partners invest with equal vigor so that the endpoint is defined on the day one when the program is taken up. Another sector which required large attention in R&D was the agricultural sector. While we are very strong globally in agriculture and we export a lot of food products, but the quality and the science behind production of urea, ammonia, and other pesticides and all that should be taken into consideration, and the drone technology should be bought into aggressively for this activity. So these are some recommendations which came for the academia industry collaboration. And the other session which was done was basically on promoting R&D, my apologies, was on the transforming India through geospatial knowledge and infrastructure need. So in this sector, the strong recommendation which came was leveraging the human capital that the country already has to develop products and solutions using the geospatial data now made available through an outstanding policy which allows everyone to access this data. Also, the freedom of operating drones has been a boon for this, and many startups are coming aggressively in this sector. But one major challenge has been that the shortage of the human resource. So new programs or a new curriculum to be introduced at the undergraduate and postgraduate level in the geospatial data analysis and mapping is one strong recommendation which was felt by the industry friends. Also, standardization of the professional services provided by the surveyors, CSI professionals, through industry-led certification is something recommended by all the groups. So overall, I think if we look at the recommendations for this sector, improvement in capital availability to startups and other businesses, and then geospatial investment fund to be created exclusively for startups, geospatial industry development strategy, then sectoral development plans, need to come up with a way forward in the new sector, such as highlighting in today's discussion like insurance sector, carbon credits, blue economy, and devices for strategies on how the government can play a very important role. So also look for market beyond India is one strong recommendation which came up, because geospatial now data is available for international collaborators also. So this geospatial policy would allow international players also to explore our data. So these are the recommendations came up. I stop here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I now request Secretary, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology for his interventions.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I am Rajendra Kumar, sir, AS in MIT. I will present the recommendations from the panel, sir. I will share my screen.
Please.
Sir, this session was technologies for sustainable development. And we had two sessions within this slot. First was judging startups and deep data and AI. And the second was focused on making India a global hub for data centers and cloud infrastructure. We had a star-studded panel, sir, in both the sessions. In the interest of time, I will not read out the names here. In terms of the key takeaways, sir, these are listed here. The first was that in terms of the design principles for the policies and for the initiatives, they must be focused on innovation and universal inclusion in terms of ensuring that all the startups can have access to data without any difficulty. And startups, even in rural areas, they can have access to the same set of support systems and data as the startups in the cities. The second key takeaway from this panel, sir, was on investment. There was a suggestion that we could make investments of 10,000 crore, out of which half of that could be focused on AI use cases and the remaining half on the deep tech startups. So this was suggested by the panel. In terms of the need for employment generation, skilling and reskilling are the major areas which this panel recommended, and the potential to create 5 million jobs, and then for large scale skilling. That was one key takeaway from this session, sir. Then, sir, data exchange also came out as one of the key takeaways, where the focus was on ensuring that the access to data could be uniform for all the ecosystem partners in terms of ease of finding and describing data sets, in terms of security, privacy, and payments, etc., and also in terms of transferring data. So this was another key takeaway from this panel, sir. The next one was in terms of approach for adopting AI at scale. The suggestions were that problems could be identified with the government, ministry, state governments, etc. And there has to be a structured approach for problem solving using AI. So this was a key takeaway to promote startups in AI and deep tech areas. And the 4 response vectors on which we can base our initiatives were as follows: promotion of startups, then talent creation in terms of skilling and reskilling, and then preparing the country for these futuristic technologies, and opening of data sets, because they at the heart of the startups focused on deep tech and AI and other emerging technologies. So this was a key takeaway from this panel. In terms of the policy support, data governance framework was the focus of this recommendation. Also, we need to promote a data sharing culture and quality data creation. That is, the data sets which are curated for ready to use by the ecosystem partners, startups, then academic institutions, and the other entities to ensure that the startups can get full support. In terms of the data exchange, API Setu is one of the key takeaways, where the focus of the panel was that we could have the data sets that are now available in the government domain, both at the central and state levels. They need to be integrated through IT bridges, through API bridges, whereby the data sharing can be uniform, seamless, and access to data can be made so much easier for the startups. So the key takeaway was that supporting startups in deep tech and AI and other areas would be critical for the achievement of the vision, the target of 5 trillion digital economy in India by 2025-26. And these were the key focus areas in the panel, sir. In the second session, sir, the focus was on making India a global hub for data centers and AI. Again, we had an outstanding panel where the discussion was very focused on the support initiatives required for making India a global hub. So in this panel, sir, the key recommendations were as follows. The first was the need for larger scale augmentation of safe, secure, and trusted data center and cloud infrastructure. At present, the capacity in India is actually not comparable to what even some of our neighboring countries have, like Singapore and even a smaller country in Europe. So this needs to be augmented at a rapid rate to a much larger level. Then procurement of data center and cloud services by government departments, both at the central and state level, they need to be really looked into and ensure that they are supporting the growth of data centers and cloud services in India. Then lack of skilled resources was another area where the panel mentioned that this requires to be urgently enhanced, and we need to focus on skilling. Right now, there is a supply constraint in the economy in terms of quality resources for IT sector and data centers and cloud infra specifically. So skilling has to be taken up at a larger scale across the entire country, sir. Then another recommendation was with regard to edge data centers, which the panel mentioned that they may be promoted in rural areas because we have now the new technology like 5G coming up, where the focus would be on edge computing, and edge data centers is the way forward in future, and it's also now coming up in a large way across the entire world. Then another recommendation was on data sovereignty, the need to host data in India within the Indian IT and data center infrastructure. And it was mentioned that the data protection bill would be a key regard to ensure that the data center ecosystem gets a very strong support and a good boost. The next key takeaway was on the policy to promote use of indigenous equipment for data centers. This is already a part of the policy that we have proposed, MITI has proposed, where we have proposed to give incentives for the domestic equipment, both IT, non-IT for data centers. Then CapEx support for data center growth also was mentioned as one of the key recommendations by panel, whereby we could provide support for capital expenditure for establishing data centers in India. Then resilient and redundant fiber connectivity was a key recommendation from the panel, especially rural areas where we want to promote data centers because land is available in those areas only. And this would be a key factor in really promoting these areas as the destinations for establishing data centers in India. Dark fiber access to data center and cloud players was also one of the key takeaways, where the panel mentioned that access to dark fiber now is something that needs to be addressed urgently to allow the larger scale growth of data centers in India. And one more key recommendation was that the state governments and other government agencies, they need to ensure that the NOCs and required for setting up data centers, they need to be fast tracked. This is a key area of concern where some stakeholders, they are saying that it takes several months to get all the approvals in place before they can establish a data center. This was another key takeaway from this session, sir. So that is also, thank you so much.
I thank all the secretaries of the line ministries in bringing out the outcomes of today's breakaway sessions. And now we look upon the honorable ministers to share their guidance based on the conversations of today's deliberations. I would first like to invite Honorable Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology and Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar-ji, to provide his views on today's deliberations.
Thank you, Minister Ashwini Vaishnav-ji, Minister Dr. Jitendra Singh-ji, Principal Secretary, Principal Scientific Advisor, Professor Vijay Raghavan, secretaries and other colleagues of various ministries, and ladies and gentlemen. So firstly, Professor Vijay Raghavan, thank you for organizing this webinar. I think it is an extremely useful and indeed important element of what should be a permanent post-budget conversation about all things technology and technology strategy for the country going forward. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for having us speak today. I have, with some degree of attention, listened to the four secretaries and the findings on these breakout sessions, and I can see that I think we are all through this webinar beginning to converge around some broad common themes around how we need to progress this whole tech economy and the tech space into the future, in keeping with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision. We can all accept and agree that thanks to the Honorable Prime Minister's vision, India is currently has become one of the world's preeminent nations in the use of technology, not just in the conventional areas of R&D and technology development and innovation, but most importantly in the use of technology to empower and transform citizens' lives, expand the digital economy and the economy in terms of opportunities and jobs, and of course, become a world-leading player in the future of technology, future of technologies and innovation. And if at any point in the history of India, the importance of technology was to be demonstrated and reaffirmed, it is the last 2 years where technology, innovation have helped the government and assisted the government become resilient, citizenry become resilient, and indeed the economy become resilient. And I think it has been a defining 2 years in terms of how technology has been deployed and has really helped the nation and in a complete entirety. This budget is quite clear, reaffirms, re-establishes or reiterates the Prime Minister's vision and strategy around deeper embedding of technology in our economy, in the way we work as a government. And he has coined the phrase "techade," which I think aptly describes what the next 10 years ought to be for us as a nation and for all of us as stakeholders in the technology economy. I will make broadly some few points. I don't want to make a long speech. It's been a long day, I can understand. The first point I want to make is that I will postulate, or I will put forward for all your consideration, that the rate and acceleration of digitization of economies, of consumers' lives, of governments are only going to intensify. And they are going to intensify deeply. And therefore, that is an issue that we need to look at both as an opportunity, as a challenge. Second is that there is going to be this race for innovation and technology in terms of ownership, leadership, standards in the coming years. Because like I said, emerging from the first point that I made, that technology is going to play a much, much more important role in the competitiveness of nations, competitiveness of economies going forward like no other time in the history of mankind. And if you take these two broad points, I would make the following cases for your respectful consideration. All of you are very experienced in both government and in technology. Most of you are more experienced in government than I am, for sure. I will argue that I have a little bit more experience in technology than some of you, but I will make the following cases. First is, I think our roadmap to technology and innovation and R&D has to be more urgent, much more driven by urgency. Our timelines have to be less gradual and more urgent. Urgency, I say, because the next 2 years, I believe, and I've used this phrase in the past, are like the Y2K moment for the world in terms of technology and innovation and the digital economy. So urgency. The second point I would put forth for all of your consideration is that out of the various R&D projects in the government of India and our overall ecosystem, we need to make them more outcome oriented, much more sharply focused on what is the result of the R&D, what is the outcome of the R&D, whether it is IPR, whether it's product, whether it's technology. Third is, and I think this point was referred to by Secretary Rajaraman and I think even DG CSIR, that this concept of collaborative development, collaborative R&D is a concept that we need to move into reality and make it much more, demonstrate a lot more efficacy. And I mean government to government, between DOT and MeitY, between MeitY and CSR, between DST and other ministries, creating an all of government approach towards development and the future of technology rather than ministry-led, silo-led. And including, by the way, I believe that into this collaborative approach, we must bring in the private sector as well. Some months ago, I had an occasion to work with the principal scientific advisor on the issue of scientific clusters. I would urge him to revisit that. I think it is time for that concept to be actualized and realized and made into policy. This issue of creating science and technology clusters around our universities and industry is a good idea whose time has come. The next point I want to just mention is this issue of standards leadership. It is time that India, as a global leading country on technology and innovation, plays a much more defining role on global standards. Whether it is 3GPP, whether it is ICANN, whether it is in other areas of science, technology, biotechnology, whatever. I think India needs to play a much more defining role in the standards leadership going forward. There was some reference to skilling and talent. I completely agree with those findings by these breakout sessions. It is an area that we, again, not just as a skill ministry or a MeitY or DOT, we need to find a way for the whole of government to address this issue of how do we build skills and how do we build an ecosystem that generates and develops those skills for the young Indian that is interested in the future of technology. Again, thank you, Professor Vijayaraghavan, for having this webinar, and I unfortunately missed the morning session because I was in the airport receiving students from Ukraine. I think I did that after Professor Dr. Jitendra Singh had just finished his reception of students. But that was a very energizing experience. And again, thank you for this webinar. And I hope out of this will emerge something that is a much more coherent all of government strategy and approach towards all things technology for India and the future of India and future of the India's decade. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for reassuring and reasserting the need for embedding technology and innovative solutions for the betterment of human life. Now, I request Honorable Minister of State, Independent Charge for Science and Technology, Minister of State, Independent Charge for Earth Sciences, and Minister of State for Atomic Energy, Space, Prime Minister's Office, Personal, Public Grievances and Pensions, Dr. Jitendra Singh Ji, to guide us through the deliberations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Honorable Minister Shri Ashwini Vaishnav Ji, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar Ji, sitting beside me, the PSA, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, Science and Technology Secretary, Dr. Chandrasekhar, Biotechnology Secretary, Dr. Rajesh Gokhale, CSIR DG, Dr. Shekhar Mande, Secretary Earth Sciences, Dr. Ravi Chandran, all the members of the faculty, and connected with us, the colleagues from the MIT. It's been a good learning experience over the last nearly 5 hours. I've been trying to hop among the sessions. So I was physically here attending some of these sessions which were being hosted by Science, Technology and CSIR, and trying to connect myself with the MIT, particularly in sessions like the one dedicated to data, the other session geospatial, e-waste, etc. I must compliment the organizers and the scientific program planners. Very intelligently, very futuristically, the themes had been decided upon. So picking up from the first session when Prime Minister addressed us and laid emphasis repeatedly on innovation, and he said this brainstorming over the day should rather be more aiming at bringing in ease of living for the common citizen through innovation rather than being a very heavy change of thought. So when I look at innovation, I think sometimes we tend to think of innovation only the terms through tend to look at it through the prism of science and through the prism of technology, where innovation is a much wider term. And if you see minutely, when we write science, technology, innovation, we write science, technology, and innovation. We don't write scientific innovation. We don't write technology innovation or technological innovation, because in English language, even each word has a separate meaning, and even similar sounding words have a different connotation. So innovation, if it has to ultimately aim at bringing in ease of living, it has to be both at the scientific level, it has to be at the industrial level, and it has to be both also at extra scientific, extra industrial level. And then a synergism of all would be possibly the most optimum combination. And I think for that, what is also required is more of awareness amongst ourselves and awareness among others about us and among us about others. So we have in the last few months started a process of having joint meetings of all the science ministries and science departments sitting together, including atomic energy and space, which are not actually, even though headquartered in Delhi. Similarly, today also we are trying to work on the same lines, and then also sit individually with each of the ministries. Like for example, in Jal Shakti, the CSIR recently offered the technology of heli-borne groundwater detection, which possibly was not very much known in that ministry, but now they have taken up the project in a big way. So now we have about 38 ministries which have come forward with applications for different technological interventions or technological assistance from the scientific ministries. So, and we did this exercise way back in 2015-16 and then realized the benefits of it. That is one thing. The other, now adding to what Rajiv was saying about the budget, of course, this budget is not only hugely giving a priority to science and the scientific projects, scientific schemes which were not hitherto seen, but at the same time also giving a lot of space to the private sector. Now just look at the defense sector involving about 25% of its defense research being carved out for the private sector. So that's also a huge departure from the past, because the Prime Minister has actually broken many taboos of the past, like unlocking of space has happened, which also, you know, is going to somewhere supplement our budget, our budget allocations. We have entered into joint ventures in atomic energy. Similarly, the drone regulations have also been revisited, given otherwise what was happening was that we were developing drones, or we were developing them surreptitiously in the premises of IIT, because IIT had the mandate of producing drones for research purpose. So there's a huge departure, and I think the milieu is now much more favorable for both scientific work, scientific experimentation, scientific research. The other part is the translation part, and one of the industry members in one of the groups in the forenoon, I heard him repeatedly, and I think Dr. Chandrasekhar in his sum up was also mentioning to that, the importance of translating research for the purpose of industry. I think that would also become easy if we integrate more closely, because we don't integrate that closely or optimally enough. So we actually are not able to translate. If we are able to translate each other amongst ourselves, everything that I own gets translated to the other person. So it has to be integration both within the science ministries, science departments, then the science ministries, science departments with the other sectoral ministries, and then of course the outside extra science, that would be industry, that would be startups, that would be private sector. And the other aspect which I've been strongly feeling over the last few months is that the issue of sustainable startups. Now it's become very fashionable talking about sustainable goals, but I think someday we will also start thinking with concern about sustainable startups, because what is happening is that we give certain support to startups, whether financial or otherwise. The project goes through, but the startup is lost, the team is lost, the individuals are lost, because maybe we are not able to link that project enough with the livelihood avenues. So someday the youngster sees an advertisement of civil services in a newspaper, fills in the form, and becomes a babu. So a scientist ending up as an undersecretary. So that kind of scenario, for that, I think one of the practical solutions is that we have a number of, because one of the industry representatives were complaining this morning, I think the onus has to be on them. Let the industry be a stakeholder in our startup program. Many of our bodies, whether the societies, governing bodies, even in CSIR and scientific bodies, have industry representatives as members. So it adds to their profile definitely, because they've been members for so many terms or whatever in a governing body of CSIR, etc. But for us, it ends up just receiving their good advice or wise or words of wisdom. If they invest in the actual sense, let them decide what kind of expertise they are looking for, what kind of experts or skilled hands they are looking for. We'll provide the know-how, we'll train the startup, we'll also will facilitate the project. But if they invest in the project right from the beginning, then they will not bank out that easily, and the startup would also have somewhere to go back. So that is one thing. The other part is we have started a program, and I would like it to be shared with the other ministries and the members of the fraternity as well. The mentoring. You see, you would have noticed, I was saying this to the colleagues in the education ministry also. If you do a survey at class 12 level, the maximum number of students are from the science streams. So then why do we have this complaint that we have very few scientists who actually come out with some meaningful projects? Is that because they are not there because of aptitude, or they are looking for something else? They are looking for a good score to get into a NEET exam or to get into IIT JEE exam, if not that, to become to clear a civil services exam. So if we have some kind of a mentorship program or a cutoff, which could actually enable us, what we are doing often is that we are there to provide support, help, even funding to those who come to us. If we could have a search mechanism, and then we could mentor them right from the beginning, right from the younger ages, maybe at the class 10 age, before they get corrupted by their own parents who start sending them to all kind of coaching centers. So that could be a long-term answer to what the complaint was repeatedly being made this morning. And as Rajiv was mentioning, the private sector publicity, I said the time is not very far when this demarcation is going to end. We're going to have project-based themes, and the private and the public sector would learn that they cannot survive without each other. And there's no option now. Integration is no longer an option. It's now an essential. It's a necessity now. And therefore, I think it's been a very good brainstorming in the sense that we actually could also understand each other's concerns, and of course the data part. That session was quite interesting, hosted by the mighty. I've been of the strong view that we need Indian data for Indian solutions. Similarly, the Indian data for the Indian regimens for the treatment of Indian diseases. That is something that we have to actually focus upon, which we are lacking somewhere. And I'm sure with the kind of geospatial and the other options now available to us, we would be able to make a headway in that as well. I once again compliment the PSA and the entire team, but I think this session happened because the budget happened. But honestly speaking, they should have happened otherwise. So I think one thought to carry home is also, why are we sitting now? Just because Prime Minister asked us to sit after the budget. But what we have discussed is beyond budget. And I think this would make our exercise wholesome if we keep sitting more frequently. In fact, in our ministries, which are science-based, we've already started this process. We also then start liking each other's faces and, get used to each other and get to work together. Thank you very much, Rajiv. Thank you. Thank you, Vaishnavji. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Sri Ashwini Vaishnavji, Minister of Communication, Electronics and Information Technology and Railways, to enlighten us on his views on the deliberation of the day.
Thank you. My colleague ministers, Dr. Jitendra Singh Ji, Sri Rajiv Chandrasekhar Ji, Principal Scientific Advisors, Dr. Vijay Raghavan Ji, Secretaries of various departments. As Honorable Prime Minister said in the beginning, this is a listening session. This is not a speaking session. So I will not take more than 3 minutes. Maybe I'll just make 4 short points. As we all know, this budget was a path-breaking budget in the sense that the focus on capital investment and the focus on technology-led growth, these were very distinctly laid out and clear budgetary allocations were made. And as a follow-up of that budget, we are having this discussion where lots of industry participants, lots of academia, all the stakeholders are today on the same page, same table. The 4 brief points I would like to make here are, while going through the presentations, these are points which I jotted down while going through the presentations of various groups. Yes, we have made very big difference in the manufacturing of, let's say, electronics items, very soon telecom products. But that's something which we need to take to a very different, totally new level, is what I could sense from the presentations. Now, the thought process is absolutely in the right direction, but what are the exact action items that needs to be taken? PLI and PMI, which are 2 constructs that we have used for promoting domestic manufacturing, have led good results, have given us good results. Beyond this, what else needs to be done? I'll request the industry to come up with suggestions, and maybe beyond this session beyond this webinar that we have today, we should have a continuous process where we can focus more on manufacturing, because each of these manufacturing initiatives is generating a huge number of employment. So that was the first point regarding manufacturing. The second good input which came during the presentations is about the use of spectrum. I'm very happy that our thought process about spectrum is today changing. For a very long period, spectrum was seen as a mere revenue generating resource. The last 2 years have shown the public good element of spectrum. Today, from the presentation of the second group, I'm very happy to observe that there is a broad consensus on various spectrum management items, issues, which are basically leading to a public good or to a technology improvement or a technology development. This we need to now convert into clear policy or legal statements which can be then implemented. Having intent is one thing, but actual execution is more important. That is the second action item I would take away from this entire exercise. Third is about the bigger role for private sector in R&D. I think both my colleague ministers made very good points, and Honorable Prime Minister has taken this very hugely bold decision to have defense and space silos broken and letting the private sector also come in so that they can also innovate and their energies can also be put into good use for the country. I think similar initiative, similar silo breaking needs to be done in many more sectors. We are starting something in railways very soon. Another 7 or 8 days, we will be launching that new policy where private sector R&D would become integral part, or rather a major part of railways R&D budget. We do hope that going forward, probably 90% of railways R&D budget would be in the private sector, compared to 100% in the public sector today. With that policy change we'll be making, similar policy changes we need to make in almost all the sectors, because until and unless we treat our industry, treat our academia, treat our stakeholders as startups and other stakeholders as one with us, rather than we versus them, I don't think we can grow as a country. So we need to take them along. We need to make them part of our ecosystem. The fourth and last point is design-led manufacturing, which Honorable Prime Minister mentioned in the morning. I think the very nice initiative that we have taken in the semiconductor policy is something which needs to be kind of, once we see the success of this, then probably it can be replicated in many more sectors. So these are the 4 brief points. First is manufacturing, second is spectrum management, third is bigger role for private sector, and fourth is design-led manufacturing, on which this webinar has given us good action items, and more work we can do on these 4 items. Thank you, Professor Raghavan, for organizing it very nicely. This is a really good platform, and I thank all the participants for giving your thoughts in a very candid way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor, to suggest the way forward.
Thank you very much. Shri Ashwini Vaishnav ji, Shri Dr. Jitendra Singh ji, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar ji, thank you very much for your interventions, and thanks to all the secretaries for their summary of the breakout session. This has been a very, very valuable meeting, and my job in the next 2 minutes is to thank everyone, which I've done, but also summarize the summary as it were. We really need to have a rate of acceleration of digitization and have ownership and standards and outcome-oriented collaborative R&D in private sectors. This is a very important message which Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar gave. The message from Dr. Jitendra Singh ji was a very important one, that Indian data and Indian solutions for the Indian market need to be developed on scale. Behind this simple statement lies a very large number of challenges which we need to overcome going forward, and they relate to the private sector, the public sector, how we interact with our ministries, integrate their demands into action, and so on. And this is something which Mantriji has already initiated, and this is a very important component which we need to take to all the other ministries also, including a major mentoring program, which is very important. Shri Ashwini Vaishnavji, you very clearly pointed out the difference which is taking place in manufacturing, in electronics and IT. But this is something, when we have very little, going to something is relatively easy, but going from something to much more is a tough challenge. And that is something which you need to take up now, scaling manufacturing for the future as we go ahead. This means pushing hard from intent to execution. Execution poses all sorts of complexities. When you bring down something, something else needs to go up and vice versa. So this is a interconnected web when execution therefore needs to take all of that into account. The private sector opening up, which the defense R&D has done now, is something which is very important. And your point about the railway R&D going into the private sector is fantastic. And our national laboratories should also be aggregators of demands and execution through our broader ecosystem, including the private sector. And this is something which has started happening, and we need to push in a very big way. Design is key in today's world. Computers and computer-aided design allow the connectivity of high-level design, right from a shoelace to a space telescope to be exported. And that adds key value. And when it's connected to manufacturing, brings great income also. So these are the areas which we need to go ahead taking forward. We will continue to be in touch with this entire group over here and with others in our ecosystem. Dr. Saraswat, member Niti Aayog, is here. We do not have time, unfortunately, for interventions from him, but we will consult with him and all the other stakeholders also going ahead. Thank you very, very much. And thank you all for a great session from the morning today. Thank you.